That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're going to go through and talk about some in-depth Superflex strategy because we break down so many Dynasty teams every single day on Patreon, and every single team that we break down almost at this point is a Superflex league. And if somehow you were not playing in Superflex, I don't know what you were doing. I believe the last one quarterback Dynasty league I played in was probably in like 2015 or 2016. Since then, we've been exclusively Superflex because it's by far and away the best way to play. And of course, before we get into the video, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, letting me know any tips that you think I missed out on Superflex formats. Subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And if you want to join our community, of course, you know where to find that over there on Patreon. When you join our flock community, you'll get access to our Dynasty rankings, which we're going to be talking about some of those quarterback rankings at the end of this video. I mean, you'll get access to our rookie rankings. You'll also get into Dynasty leagues with us. You'll get in our Dynasty group chat, an in-depth podcast breaking down your Dynasty team when you join. There's so much stuff going on as always. That should be it. Let's go through and let's talk about some Superflex strategy here. And I don't necessarily want to just speak on the obvious. I don't want to say, okay, well, let's go through and let's draft quarterbacks earlier. Who is that helping? That's not helping anybody at all. Instead, I want us to just go from where we usually stand in Dynasty with your Superflex strategy, and we will move on from there. We'll go the next step further and talk about adjusting for your league format more specifically. And what I mean for that is the first thing I want to look at is going to be the amount of teams that are in your league. Now, I will let the cat out the bag real quick. I have been writing an in-depth Dynasty book, just going through and really laying all my thoughts out on Dynasty Fantasy Football, how you should be attacking startup drafts, rookie drafts, roster construction, I mean, historical trends with player evaluations, and that will be available at some point this offseason. I don't want to necessarily go and let you know when, but I'm going to be pulling up a chart here from that book. I'm going to be pulling up two charts from that book that I really want to be highlighting because I think that, I mean, not many people view the game this way, and it can help people out. And going back to what we were talking about with the amount of teams that are in your league, it's going to dramatically change your Superflex strategy. Now, I know that a lot of people understand if you play in a 16-team format, hell, I mean, you need to go through and you need to draft a quarterback with your first 3 picks. I mean, in a 16-team Dynasty Superflex league, the difference between Matthew Stafford and Jonathan Taylor, it's not that large. And I know that is crazy. Whereas in a 10-team Dynasty league, I mean, obviously, you'd rather have Javonte Williams over Matthew Stafford. I mean, you can go down the list. Let me just pull up my running back rankings here. I mean, you'd probably prefer having J.K. Dobbins over Matthew Stafford. You'd probably prefer having, I mean, Matthew Stafford alongside Antonio Gibson near that same range. Whereas that's just not the supply and demand of the quarterback position once you get into larger league formats. And Thomas, can you please throw up this little chart here that we made? And I went through and I kind of laid out just a simple chart on how many teams you could be expecting rostering said amount of starting quarterbacks in your specific league. And this is so damn important because, I mean, you're going to find that in a 16-team format, I mean, yes, every position's harder to come by. But what's special and what's different about the quarterback position is there are only so many of those players. You know, you only have 32 starters regardless. I mean, in a 16-team format, you may not be excited to go through and start the wide receiver 60. Hell, you can do it, though. You can go through and you can start the wide receiver 60 in your flex spot. You can start the wide receiver 70, and you know that's going to be a player that's actually on an NFL field, getting snaps, drawing targets, and has the chance to put up fantasy points. Whereas, can you start the quarterback 35? Nope. Can you start the quarterback 34? Nope. Can you start the quarterback 33? Nope. It's 32 and up every single week at, I mean, most. Some weeks, obviously, you have buys. I mean, there, it's going to be a little bit of a different story. So knowing the supply and demand ratio of the quarterback position is going to be crucial. While, yes, it does affect running back when you change your league size, it affects tight end. The most impacted position is going to be the quarterback position for obvious reasons. And obviously, you go into every startup draft, you go into every Superflex league that you're in, and what's everyone's goal? Your goal should be, I want 3 solid starting quarterbacks that I can rely on for the foreseeable future, that I can go through and plug and play every single week. We want those 2 top guys that we can just don't even really have to think about the matchups. And we want that third option like Ryan Tannehill. Whereas if we have a Josh Allen injury, if we have a Justin Herbert injury, we can put Tannehill in. And also we're going to be able to play him in bye weeks for those other quarterbacks as well. So everybody's goal is to get 3 starting quarterbacks. And in a 10-team league, majority of the league's going to get there. I mean, if everyone goes into the draft with the idea of getting 3 starting quarterbacks, now we know that other teams, they'll go, okay, you know what? Let's try to hoard the quarterback position. Let's try to draft quarterback. And if you've seen a team do that in a 10-team format, it's just not going to pan out, because you can see that 3 different teams can roster 4 quarterbacks in a 10-team format. 6 teams can roster 3 starting quarterbacks in a 10-team format. And there's only 1 team left over that was not able to get to that threshold with 3 quarterbacks. And just put yourself in the shoes of that 1 team. Say, hell, in this startup draft here, we were only able to come away with Trey Lance and Ryan Tannehill. I kind of want to be able to go through, and I want to be able to pull up just a Derek Carr, just someone that's very cheap. I want to have the option to have someone for our bye weeks. You are going to have, every chance in the world to go through and trade for that quarterback at a massive discount, because you'll be able to go and just put in your league chat, say, hey guys, looking for a 3rd starting quarterback, and look at, just the buyer's market that you have. You're going to have 3 teams with 4 starting quarterbacks that are dying to give you Derek Carr for close to nothing. You're going to have 6 teams that are, completely out of the market buying a quarterback. How often are you sitting in your Superflex league and you have 3 starting quarterbacks? And even if you're not that comfortable with the 3rd, even if that 3rd, say someone like Jameis Winston, you're still not going out there and dying to trade for a 4th. So, you can pretty much say that in a market like this, there are going to be, a decent amount of people that are willing to sell you a guy, and you're the only person buying. Not to mention that you go into rookie drafts, and a big thing that I've been breaking down on Patreon is people will send me their 10-team Superflex leagues, and they'll have 4 starting quarterbacks already on the roster. Just say they go through, they have Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Tua Tagovailoa, and Zach Wilson. And they also have the rookie picks 104, 105, 106. I'm going, well, hell, those rookie picks, it's not going to be a pretty spot to sit in, because you know that the teams at the very top of the draft, they're probably passing on quarterback because it's a 10-team league. They probably already have 3 options themselves. So you're maybe going to be in the situation where you're sitting at the 106 and you're asking yourself, okay, am I going to be going with David Bell or Matt Corral? And obviously Corral is going to be the much better option. But if you already have 4 starting quarterbacks, what the hell are we doing here? And you can't draft Matt Corral expecting to be able to flip him for an immediate profit when nobody in the league needs a starting quarterback. So just understand that if you are in that 10-team league, we need to go through and we need to be moving quarterbacks down our draft board. Like, I am very willing to go through and pass on the Kyler Murray in the 1st round, pass on Kyler Murray, and instead grab Najee Harris, because I know that every team's going to go through and get those 3 starting quarterbacks. And then you will be able to pick up for almost free guys like Ryan Tannehill later on. And I'm going to feel comfortable doing so. You go to a 12-team league. I think a 12-team league is, the perfect example. This is what the majority of people play in. This is what I try to exclusively play in at this point, because while 16-team, 14-team Superflex leagues are a ton of fun, I've had, not going to lie, just the bad experience of leagues like that failing because some teams that don't understand quarterback value simply are never able to be competitive, and those teams just die in those leagues. But in a 12-team format, you can kind of see that there's a little bit of push and pull between buyers and sellers. Here we just have the example because there's always going to be one person in your league going out there and hoarding quarterbacks. That one team was able to grab 4 starters. Maybe a couple of those guys, were lower tier options, guys like, Matt Ryan, Zach Wilson, regardless. Let's just call it 4 starters. Then you're going to have half the league that's able to get to that minimum 3 threshold. And then you have 5 people left over with only 2 starting quarterbacks. You have 5 people with, say, Trey Lance and Matthew Stafford. Well, it's a little bit of just say a push and pull, because here you don't necessarily have to go out there and buy that 3rd quarterback if you're sitting there with 2 options that you feel comfortable with. So I think that this is probably the ideal situation to be playing in a 12-team Superflex league if you don't want quarterback value to just go through the roof. Because if we move over to a 14-team Superflex league, this is where you can kind of see, hell, I mean, it's going to be damn near impossible to get 4 starting quarterbacks on your roster. So let's say no team's able to do that, but 6 teams are still able to get 3 starting quarterbacks, because obviously that's everybody's goal coming into the draft. So almost half the league can get there with 3 starting quarterbacks. And then say 6 other teams are able to get 2 starters. And I think this is a very realistic scenario that we outlined. I would say that this is almost, I mean, the most likely case. And here you have 2 teams left over with 1 starting quarterback. And I know a lot of people want to say, well, hell, if I'm going through and I'm plugging in, say, Javonte Williams into my flex spot, I'm going to be able to be competitive with everybody else in this league, regardless if I have 1 or 2 starting quarterbacks. Well, that's assuming that your 1 starting quarterback, that's assuming that your guy like Kirk Cousins starts the entire year, and you're going to be almost taking an automatic loss during his bye week, knowing that you're going to be going up against the starting lineup with 2 starting quarterbacks when you have none. So almost, I mean, you want to just say that those teams that don't have 2 starting quarterbacks, it is at the very minimum an uphill battle that I am not willing to bet on those teams to win. Now, lastly, let's check out that 16-team league, because here, I mean, it is just a completely different situation yet again. I mean, say 5 teams in the league are able to go through and get 3 starting quarterbacks, because that's everybody's goal, but only, I mean, less than 33%, about 30% of the league is able to get to their goal to get 3 starting quarterbacks. And then you have, I mean, half the league that has 2. And if you have 2 starting quarterbacks in a 16-team format, I mean, you are drawing life. You are going to be fine if you have those elite level wide receivers around them, and if one of those quarterbacks doesn't go down. But then you have 5 teams in the league with only 1 starting quarterback left. And you don't know who that starting quarterback is going to be. And honestly, one of the main reasons that I wanted to go through and make this video is, A, I already had these chapters written out in our Dynasty book that's going to be coming out this offseason, of course. And B, because I had someone reach out to us on Patreon going, hell, Mason, I'm about to join I can't remember if it was a 14 or a 16-team Dynasty league. They were saying, I'm drafting at the 113. I was thinking about going through and waiting until the 3rd round to take our first quarterback. And I was saying, hell, that is the worst idea I have ever heard. You need to be going quarterback at the turn minimum, because look, if it's a 16-team league here, you're going to get 5 teams left over with only 1 quarterback. And put yourself in the shoes of someone with only 1 quarterback in a 16-team Superflex league, because it's not as simple as let's go through and let's trade for 1. Because if you're a team that has 2 starting quarterbacks, they're just completely off the market. Like, what are you going to say if some team comes up to you and you're sitting there with Trey Lance and Justin Fields, and those are your only 2 options, and they say, hell, can I give you 2 first-round picks for Justin Fields? You're going to say, F off, I need Justin Fields, because you understand that, I mean, if you decide to trade one of those guys away, you're going to be in that position where it's damn near impossible for you to get one of those guys. So all of a sudden, you are going to be in a world where you have guys like, say, in this draft class, it won't matter if Kenny Pickett. It doesn't matter if Matt Corral. Just say slide to the 20th, 21st pick overall, where historically speaking, the hit rates on those rookie quarterbacks are incredibly low. They're going to be going at the 101. They're going to be going at the 102. You're going to have Sam Howell in the range of someone like Treylon Burks. So just understand that if you are going through and playing in a 16-team format, a 14-team format, you need to be getting your quarterbacks right away. Whereas if you're in a 10-team league on the opposite end of the spectrum, I mean, go through and look at the teams that are hoarding quarterbacks while you're able to stack up elite level running backs like Javonte Williams and just laugh at them. Say, you have no idea what the hell you were doing. You were not going to be able to go through and demand a high price for these quarterbacks. You're going to have a ton of value just sitting down there on your bench that you can't do anything with. And I'm going to be able to get quarterbacks very cheaply in our rookie drafts. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about, is understanding the difference of quarterback value and the supply and demand of the market in a 10-team, 12-team, 14-team, and 16-team league. And of course, as we said, yes, it's going to change with running back. It's going to change with wide receiver as well. It's, of course, going to be harder to get starting running backs in a 16-team format. But the difference is you can start the running back 40. You can start the running back 50. You can start the wide receiver 60. You can start the wide receiver 70. While you may not like it, it's definitely a player that's going to give you some points to your starting lineup, whereas the quarterback 33 is getting you 0. So let's definitely go through and prioritize those QBs. And then another factor that I want to talk about is the difference between a league where it's super flex and you have to start 2 QBs. Now, this is something that I've learned the hard way. I mean, back in 2017, 2018, there were some leagues coming on the scene that were two quarterback. You started two, and there were no Superflex, and I jumped in them, and I was thinking that, hell, this is the exact same league we've ever played in before because, everybody, if you hear on a podcast, they say Superflex leagues are the same as two quarterback formats. You're starting two quarterbacks no matter what if you want to be a competitive roster. Well, that just could not be any less true because if you find yourself in a position where, let me pull this chart back up, you find yourself in a position where you're one of those owners, say in the 12-team league where you only have two starting quarterbacks. Well, if you're one of the 5 owners in that 12-team league that only has 2 starting quarterbacks, what happens all of a sudden when you have Jameis Winston going down? What happens if, the perfect example, you miss Kyler Murray for half the season? Say Kyler Murray goes through, he has an ankle sprain. You don't know when he's going to come back. He's supposed to come back in 2 weeks. And that actually lingers and he ends up missing 6 weeks like he did this season. Well, instead of going through and having to start a wide receiver 5 in that spot, where if you look, this past year, a wide receiver 5, let's just draw this out right now. A wide receiver 5 is giving you about 11 fantasy points per game. Let me just go through and check out who the wide receiver 60 was. That's technically a low-end wide receiver 5, high-end wide receiver 6. That guy was Odell Beckham Jr. at 9.2 points. If you're looking at the wide receiver 49, that was Van Jefferson at 10.2. So yeah, you're getting about 10 points a game from that player. Whereas, if you look at the difference between that and Kyler Murray on a points per game basis is giving you about 23 points. So the expectation on your loss of your starting lineup output is going to be about 13 points per game, which of course is going to be devastating. Of course, that's going to make it where it's very difficult for you to go through and for you to win games in a Superflex league if you're only starting Kirk Cousins as your quarterback 1. However, in a 2 quarterback format, instead of having that loss of 13 points per game, it's going to be a loss of 23. And try to overcome 23 points per game. Especially the perfect example is that Kyler Murray example, where you're going through and you're looking at a team that, of course, you can always say, go trade for Colt McCoy. But what happens in this Kyler Murray example, where if another owner owns Colt McCoy and he's saying, hell, give me a 2nd round pick. And you're going, okay, I can't give a 2nd for a player that's going to have legitimately no value this upcoming offseason. What are we talking about here? And then all of a sudden you go, let me just try to go with the 2-3 weeks without this product. 6 weeks later, you're out of the playoffs. And you can honestly, kind of see that trend as well with teams that only have 2 starting quarterbacks if they're able to stay healthy. Because all of a sudden, you're going through and you're just handing 2 weeks away. You're handing 2 weeks away to whoever you're playing, just knowing that there are going to be 2 separate weeks that you're going to have those quarterbacks on bye, that you're going to be having a loss of 23 points per game out of your starting lineup that you can't do anything about. You can't put a wide receiver 5 in there. So, of course, this is all a discussion about points per game, and obviously there's a lot of trade value that goes into this aspect, but just understand that that trade value is going to just get skewed as well, because that team that all of a sudden drafted 4 starting quarterbacks, they're going to be able to hold a much higher price point because you're almost being held hostage there. Because if you don't trade for a starting quarterback, all of a sudden, you better be a team looking to compete the following season. Whereas in a Superflex league, you could keep your head above water and you could end up just making it into the playoffs and getting your quarterback back. So it's a different scenario because there's a big difference between losing 23 points per game out of your starting lineup, whether that's a guy missing a bye, whether that's a guy going through with an injury, and instead you're missing only 13 if it's a Superflex format where you can still win those weeks. Now, the last thing I want to discuss is the rest of the starting lineup. Now, this is in a different chapter of this book that we are writing right now, but I know we're using the extreme examples here of leagues that have 8 starting lineup spots and leagues that have 12 starting lineup spots. I know that's a big difference, but keep in mind, it's just a spectrum where these are usually the teams that are breaking down over there on Patreon. I get a lot of teams sent to me that only have 9 starters. I'm saying, hell, what are we doing here? We need to be putting more starters in this lineup. I prefer 11 to 12 starters in every single one of my Dynasty leagues because then guys like Rondale Moore, guys like Kadarius Toney, they're incredibly important to hit in your rookie draft, where if you're playing in a league that has only 8 starters and you bust Rondale Moore, it doesn't matter, doesn't really impact your team. And this is something that we went through and we looked at. We looked at just how a starting lineup would be scoring in terms of you have an average wide receiver 1, an average wide receiver 2, an average running back 1, an average running back 2, average flex 1, average flex 2, average going through and looking at all the averages across and trying to dictate what positions are going to be more important. And of course, the supply and demand aspect always goes into this as well. But you're going to see that your win rate is going to be drastically changed from moving to a lineup that is shallower with less flex spots from the quarterback position to one that's has 12 starters. I mean, the math is simple. If you're looking at this, quarterbacks should score about 30% of your starting lineup output every single week if you have 8 starters there. Now, when you move that to 12 starters, it's a little bit closer to 20%. Now, I don't want to have a lot of takeaways here because obviously there are so many different variables. Obviously, I mean, in a league where you have 12 starters, you're going to be starting up to say 5, 6 wide receivers every single week at the minimum. So there you should be drastically skewing towards drafting wide receivers as shown by this chart. And I'm going to be willing to wait a little bit more on the quarterback position. And also a big thing is I'm going to be willing in that Superflex league that is 11 to 12 starters to stop at drafting 2 quarterbacks. Because then when you go to take, say, you're stuck on the clock, and let me pull up our last startup draft where I believe we took Tannehill in the 11th round. And Tannehill, in my opinion, was a fantastic selection there. And of course, we're just memorizing this off the top of my head. Maybe we took Tannehill in like the 9th, whatever it was a later pick. And yeah, we actually ended up taking Ryan Tannehill in the 7th. I'm sorry. We took Carson Wentz in the 10th. But going back to that Ryan Tannehill selection, I take him at the 705. Whereas if this is a league that instead is going to be where we have to start 11, 12 players, and I know that we're going to need wide receiver depth, after we take Tannehill at the 705 and we get to Tua Tagovailoa, instead of taking Tua Tagovailoa, there maybe instead, I'm going to go through and I'm going to take Chase Claypool because it's going to be a lot less important that we have that quarterback production in our starting lineup every single week, including during those bye weeks. And instead, we can go through and we can focus on building a little bit more wide receiver depth, building a little bit more running back depth, and disregarding that third quarterback. So I really hope that this podcast was able to help y'all out and just diving a little bit more in depth on Superflex strategy and how to be adjusting for your league format. And of course, I want your opinion. Let me know if y'all like the videos like this down there in the comment section. Let me know if I'm not helping anybody and I should just kind of stick to players, but I would love to know that. And of course, thank you for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. Really hope that you have a great day. Hope I'm talking to you over there on Patreon sometime soon. And yeah, have a great one.